What's up, world? Uko here from Better Therapy Now, and welcome to lesson 3 of the Curiosity Mindset, the art of asking better questions. So, in this lesson, we'll talk about why we ask questions and how can we take a conversation from surface level to beneath surface level. That should be your goal in every conversation that you have, is taking conversations deeper than the surface level. The first step when it comes to asking better questions is just asking open-ended questions. What are open-ended questions? They're questions that require more than just a yes or no. So asking questions like, what led to this situation? Or how could this be improved? These invite more creative solutions and more nuanced answers. And that's how you get somebody to open up so that you can explore their mind a little bit. Open-ended questions and curiosity are powerful allies. Yes or no questions don't leave a whole lot of room for curiosity to really be realized. You lose a lot of the potential that curiosity presents for growth. Open-ended questions expose gaps in knowledge and understanding, and that's exactly what you want. When there's a gap in knowledge, there's going to be an emotional reaction, and that's also what you want. If you ask open-ended questions of somebody else, they're going to model that behavior and ask you open-ended questions. And that's what's desired. This creates a pathway to depth. Yes or no questions have a place in the conversation complex and in this art of asking better questions. Consider these two examples. Do you believe that people can change fundamentally? That's a yes or no question. Versus this question, what do you think it means for somebody to change fundamentally? They sound very similar, but one is just yes or no question. The other one actually requires deeper thought and more explanation, and it encourages dialogue. And that is really the difference between yes or no versus open-ended in terms of seeing these types of questions as tools. One, yes or no questions act as a springboard from one part of the conversation to the next part of the conversation. Open-ended questions encourage more dialogue, and it exposes gaps in understanding and invites emotions into the conversation. Try not to use open-ended questions as a way to maneuver on somebody that you're speaking to. For example, don't try to win the argument. Detach yourself from this idea of being right or having the upper hand in a conversation. Use open-ended questions with the goal of getting the person you're speaking to model that behavior. Ultimately, you want them to do the same to you, to require more of you. When you ask an open-ended question of somebody, you're asking for more. You're asking for more explanation. You're asking for more understanding, and you're asking somebody to be more vulnerable about how they feel about things. Use open-ended questions as a way to invite more emotions into all the conversations that you have, because our bandwidth for emotions and feeling emotions is much, much larger than our bandwidth to speak and way larger than our bandwidth to think. This is why when you try to memorize something and there's, for example, like a language or a word or an experience and there's an emotion tied to it, you're much more likely to remember it in greater detail because your mind works better when you are inviting emotions into things. It's important to differentiate this from making decisions or doing behaviors based on emotions. What you're doing is you're inviting emotions into the conversation process or this aspect of having dialogue in the sense of being vulnerable and being more open while you are being curious and exploring the mind of the person that you're speaking to, and also exploring your own mind to find those blind spots. Your emotions play an important part in the conversation process and within the dialogue with another person, but they aren't necessarily the path to truth. They're more like the key to unlock the doors to certain blind spots. There are several different types of question templates that you can use. There could be future-oriented questions or other types of structures to questions. But the type of question that you really want to become good at in the curiosity mindset are clarity-seeking questions. So asking things like, can you help me understand what you mean by blank? Or how do you define success in this certain area if you're talking about success? A lot of people will kind of say things that are not very clear or not well thought out, but you won't challenge those things. You have to be bold enough to challenge ambiguity and be bold enough to challenge something that hasn't really been thought out very much. Force people to explain or think through certain thoughts or opinions that they have. If you're bold enough to force somebody to think through a thought or think through an opinion or provide extra clarity to something, then they'll ask you to do the same thing. And that's exactly what you want them to do. You want them to treat you the same so that you're forced to think through things. As you are forced to explain things in more details, or explain some of your beliefs in more details, then you'll start to run across certain blind spots. You'll start to see that not everything is adding up in every situation. A really good technique when it comes to the art of asking questions is the five whys technique. This is especially good when you are by yourself and kind of exploring your own mind, which you should do. The five whys technique is usually used with businesses that have operational issues. It helps them identify what the issue is and what the root cause of that issue is by just getting deeper and deeper and deeper to that root cause. But you can also do this with your own shortcomings when it comes to social situations, especially, but other issues that arise in your life. So, an example of this might be someone who has a hard time breaking the ice with other people in social situations. You would ask, why do you have a hard time breaking the ice in social situations? And they'll say something like, well, I worry about how I might come across and that I might be judged. And you'll say, well, why do you worry about being judged or how you come across? And you'll say, the answer to that is, I feel insecure and feel very awkward when I'm breaking the ice with somebody else, so I don't do it. And you say, well, why do you feel insecure and feel awkward? And then they may say something like, well, in the past, I've tried to do this and it didn't go very well and I felt criticized or I was criticized. And you'll say, well, how come you felt criticized and how come maybe you were actually criticized by those other people when you attempted to break the ice in the past? And then they'll say something like, because I had, or maybe after you talk to them a little bit, they'll discover that they had a lack of practice in social interaction. So you get deeper and deeper to kind of the root cause. And with this example, you discover, well, they have a lack of practice in social situations, maybe a lack of communication practice specifically, and not enough positive reinforcement, which would explain the lack of confidence. So doing the five whys allows you to get closer and closer to that root cause of an issue so that you can develop an action plan to address that issue. The next part of asking better questions is enduring rejection. And I think this part is really exciting in the art of asking better questions because it kind of forces you to break the ice with strangers. And you can practice this. You can practice enduring rejection because that's really what's at stake. When you go to somebody in a social situation and you don't know them and they don't know you, the thing that's at stake is just being rejected, them not really caring, them not wanting to talk to you, them rejecting you in some other socially or passive aggressive way. And when you are practicing enduring rejection, start small. You can speak to somebody when you're sitting in line at a food store or in the grocery store, or you can talk to your waiter a little bit more. Your waiter has to talk to you. The person at the coffee shop that's working has to talk to you. They're not just going to be rude. It's kind of their job to be nice. So it takes the edge off a little bit, but also gives you kind of a segue or a pathway to start talking to people that you don't really know to kind of build that positive reinforcement so that you can break the ice with strangers. Finding creative ways to endure rejection in your everyday life and from a social standpoint will give you the courage and make you a little bit more bold when it comes to asking people more open-ended questions and pushing people to kind of explore and explain their beliefs to you. That's exactly what you're going to do in this worksheet. You're going to transform questions from yes or no questions to open-ended questions and also explore the intent of your question, asking yourself, why do you ask certain questions? You're going to explore this question as deeply as you possibly can. You're going to identify the emotions attached to this question, what the intention is and why you're doing it, and what the potential is for further exploration based on the initial question that you crafted. Then you're going to the endurance rejection portion of the exercise, where you're going to identify a time when you were rejected in some way, either aggressively rejected or passive aggressively rejected. As you explore this time when you were rejected in the past and you explore some of the emotions and circumstances associated with that, you'll see rejection as an opportunity for growth. And that's the whole idea of the enduring rejection portion of the worksheet, to see rejection as an opportunity for growth rather than some sort of judgment on your self-worth or some sort of failure. So we've talked about the importance of humility in our quest for truth seeking. We've talked about how it can really enhance us and really open us up and allow us to be vulnerable. We talked about how to use questions as a sort of art and to use certain types of questions as tools. As you go through this process, you may notice that certain patterns present themselves where you deviate from the truth. This is why it's so important to engage in dialogue with other people, or at least write down your beliefs and some of your ideas about things so that you can read it over and identify certain patterns and instances where you're deviating from rationality. When you're deviating from rationality, that's when you know that a cognitive bias is playing some sort of role in your thought patterns. And that will be the topic of our next lesson.